Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, I would like to yield to Ms. Valerie Newton for roll call.
Thank you, sir. As I call your name, please indicate your attendance. Chris Clark.
Here.
Dennis Edwards.
Here.
Tim Benton.
Here.
Gary Rhoda.
Here.
Winston Mosier.
Here.
Corey Singletary.
Here.
Alan West.
Here.
Glenn McCoy.
Here.
Roger Carroll.
Here.
Gary Grady. Mr. Chairman, you have 9 in attendance.
Thank you very much. At this time, I need a motion to accept the agenda for tonight. I have a motion by Mr. Dennis Edwards and a second by Mr. Vincent Rozier. Any discussion, anything need to be added to? I yield to you, Ms. Valerie.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 yeses.
Thank you very much. At this time, I need a motion to approve the minutes for the July 19th regular meeting. So moved. I have a motion by Mr. McCoy, a second by Mr. Tim Benton. Any changes? I yield to you, Ms. Valerie.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 yeses.
Thank you very much. Spotlight and recognition.
None tonight.
Thank you. Citizens participation.
Yes, sir, Chairman Carroll, we have 3 tonight, Mr. Corey Lyons, Mrs. Liz Ruffin Cox, and Mr. Donnell Goins.
At this time, according to board policy 2310, first part of at least one regular scheduled board meeting will be set aside for citizens to address the board through public comment. Each speaker will receive 3 minutes to present comments. However, the public comment session will not be exceeded 30 minutes total, except by majority vote of the board. During the public comment period, the board chair will recognize speakers in the order in which they have signed in. Substitute speakers will not be permitted, and speakers may not donate any portion of their time to another speaker. Board members will not respond to individuals who address the board except to request clarification of points made by the presenter. At this time, Mr. Corey.
Good afternoon to the board and everyone present. I'm honored to be here on this evening. Just have a few things I wanted to ask the board members who are present this evening. The first thing is I wanted to know if it was possible for me to, I guess, to go into a closed session with the board members concerning there was an event that occurred in one of the schools in Tar Heel this year. Towards the end of the school year, I wanted to know if we can discuss those things that occurred at a later time and date. I'm not going to go into details of it. Many of you probably maybe know what I'm talking about, but I want to know if it's possible that we can discuss those things. I'm just a concerned citizen who had students that attended Bladen County schools. The next thing is I want to know where the board stood on CRT. Now, I don't come before you to be divisive or anything of the sort, but I just wanted to see what your perspective, what your thoughts, what your ideas were on that matter, because it is a hot button issue. It's one that's trending right now, social media, also politics, but I just believe it should be a non-political question or non-political subject because we know that CRT, critical race theory, it is something that is being taught in colleges, not necessarily in schools now. But I believe the governor left it up to the school district, school boards as to decide whether or not they wanted it to be taught. Now, I know many people say that critical race theory is divisive. Some people say it's the oppressor versus the oppressor. But when I did my own personal study of critical race theory, I found out that it basically is a study of how laws, rules, and policies and procedures were created based upon race. And I know many of you who are much older than I am. I'll be 46, my birthday, August 16th. Many of you grew up in an era where you experienced rules and laws based upon race. I grew up, I live now in Bladenboro, North Carolina, which it was once known as a sundown town, but there were some rules and laws that pertain to certain people that you could not go there after sundown. But I want to know where the board stood on the study of critical race theory on tonight.
And we will get back with you on both those issues.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thank you so very much.
Ms. Liz Ruffin Cox.
Ms. Cox.
Good evening.
Can I say, why we don't have that thing out there tonight for the people?
You go around.
I'll go around.
Good evening again. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things that I have brought to the board before. One at the last meeting about the cost for the books for our BCC students. I know Dr. Atkinson had mentioned that we were gonna have some types of meetings going on to talk to the BCC to kind of collaborate with that. And just wanted to kind of find out where we were with that. Of course, the fall semester begins on Monday, so it's a little bit late probably for this time, but we don't want students, if possible, to miss out on taking those classes because they can't afford the books or the access code. And also, I'm happy to see that Dr. Henson is on the agenda to look at the data. I know last meeting there was some discussion, and it seems that it might be an East Bladen issue because East Bladen is the one that's speaking out. But I think when we listen to Dr. Henson, we're going to see it's a Bladen County Schools issue. And the things that Mr. Goins and I are advocating for, not just for East Bladen students, but for all of Bladen County school students. And the issues that we're encountering are not just East Bladen issues, they're issues of Bladen County schools.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, gentlemen. I had a number of parents that has been inquiring to me to ask if the board would reconsider having students return to fall 2021-22 school year uniforms due to economic reasons. Number two, they ask, when will the logistical requirements be addressed and publicized for students returning to in-person learning, such as bus riding, mask requirements, classroom sizes? And because next week, we would like to provide definitive information when we begin new enrollments and do an open house, which are both next week. Finally, I ask that the Board of Education members consider one of Mrs. Cox's earlier recommendations and visit all of our schools to see the contemporary operations of our staffing and student accountability paradigm. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Henson.
Yeah. Get you bigger, is that better?
So tonight, what I really want to do is give us a framework of where we were before COVID, before all this all this stuff happened to us, and to kind of give us a baseline, if you will, to kind of gauge where we were before as we make our way back post-COVID, if you will. So I put these documents in board docs for you to review, but there are some things that I want to kind of highlight. But honestly, if anyone has questions while I'm going through this, please feel free to stop me and ask questions, because I want to make sure that I'm clear, concise, and everyone leaves with the same information. So the first thing that I want to point out is the last time that we had official testing, they actually counted in the accountability model was the 18-19 school year. So that's the last time that the results were used for accountability purposes. We did test this year, but of course the results from the assessments will not be used for accountability purposes. We just did it to get the data pretty much to see the condition of the state and also the condition of the district that we are working in and the children, so we can help them and move forward from this. So the last time that we had actual testing, the performance composite was 47.9. And so that is the number where you take all the EOCs together, you take all of the EOGs together. Oops, thank you. and you put them in a bucket and you kind of mix them together. And that's the percent of students that were on grade level 3, 4, and 5. That means they have mastery of the standards. But you need to understand that level 1 and level 2 also indicates the students had understanding of the standards, but the key word there is limited understanding of the standards. So it's not enough for a teacher just to know the standards. They've got to really know the depth to go into standards when they're teaching the content and teaching the subject area. Otherwise, they'll continue to get a level 1 or level 2 until they are teaching on the correct level of difficulty. But in this situation, in this school year, 47.9% of the children were actually scoring on grade level. That's at the high school and the elementary and the middle schools. The next thing is the ACT. And I'm really proud about this one because we've come up a long ways since then. This is the number of students that are proficient and ready for college, actual entrance into one of the UNC institutions, and are proficient and ready to go. The ACT was used when we adopted the Common Core state standards. That was for the purpose of identifying which school districts are, they have kids ready to go out of the gate to go straight into college. Not so much into community college or trade schools, but college ready, college bound. And that's the minimum requirement for the UNC systems. Then we have the ACT Workkeys. That was at 50.3%. That is an assessment designed for the CTE pathway students that are not going to college right away, or they were going to go into the career field and get some more skills. There were 4 different subtests, and on that particular assessment, over half of the students scored at proficient. That would be a level silver, gold, or platinum. The next thing is math course rigor. This is the number of kids that took math 3 and passed it. And then EL progress. These are the number of our EL students, English language students, that made progress for the year. That doesn't mean they speak perfect English. It's taking them where they are in a school year and meeting the expectation every year, getting better with speaking English. And that was 31.5% of the population. And you see we have a rather large population that qualifies in the EL program, almost 300 kids. And then, of course, we have the cohort graduation rate. That year it was at 91.6%. That's the percent of students that enter high school in the 9th grade and finish exactly within 4 years. You can finish early or you can finish on time. But if you don't finish in 4 years, that student counts against you. So in that case, 91% of the students that entered 9th grade, 4 years later, they graduated. Now with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, this is where we get into the world of subgroups. You notice the subgroups I have in yellow here are the new subgroups that we adopted. Well, the state adopted. So of course, we're breaking down all students, which is that 47% that I talked about earlier. We also have female, male. We've always had economically disadvantaged. Those were the students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. But we also have now the non-economically disadvantaged, which is used to compare between those that receive nutritional benefits versus those that do not qualify. So I just want to point to the numbers there, because the number at the bottom is the number of scores that qualify for that measure. Look at that number compared to the students in the district that do not need those or qualify for those nutritional benefits. ELs is what we talked about before, and the students with disabilities. Dr. Atkinson, can you move over just a little bit?
Mr. Henson.
Yes, sir.
So over 2/3 of our students are economically disadvantaged.
That is correct.
Wow.
That is correct. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So just like with our students with disabilities, we've always had this subgroup, but with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, we had to compare the students with disabilities versus those, oops, it jumped on, did I do that or?
Get you over here.
There we go. Awesome, yeah, great. So the NSWD is students without disabilities. And you look at their proficiency, level 3, 4, and 5, compared to the students with disabilities, and you see that number. So the bottom number again is the number of scores that you have in that bucket, if you will, and the NSWD are the number of scores without disabilities, and that includes a wide gambit of qualifiers. The next one we have would be the AIG students. So you can see the number of AIG students in the district, and you have all this in board docs that you can reference at any time. The next subgroup we picked up is now the homeless subgroup. So you can see in this particular year, you had 71 students that qualified as homeless, and you can see their percent of proficiency. The next is foster care. You can see the number 30, 33, and their proficiency. Military related students, those would be the ones that would potentially move around in and out of school districts and their proficiency rating. Military, and then finally we have migrants. You can see that percentage and the number of migrant students.
Dr. Hanson, just a quick one clarification.
Yes.
On those subgroups, are you looking at number of students or is that number of scores?
Number of scores.
Okay, so number of scores.
Number of
Okay.
scores.
All right,
Yes,
just want to
yes,
make
sir.
sure that we're clear on that.
Okay, if we can move back to my left. So then it goes down, you have a composite of reading in grades 3 through 8. That's the elementary and middle schools. Okay. Then you have science, which I combined in the green, 5th and 8th grade science for the elementary and the middle schools. Well, in our county, it would be the middle schools, 5th and 8th grade science. I broke them down individually, and then I gave you the biology EOC scores. Again, you got it for all students, and then I've got it broken down by subgroup for you as well. So let's take biology, for example. All students were at 55.7. Then the females, 59.7, the males, 51.4. The Black subgroup, 45.5. Hispanic, 39.2. Multiracial, 47.1. The white students, 69.2. Economically disadvantaged, 49.3, non-economically disadvantaged, 70.2, and you can follow that across from there. The next one is EL progress. Again, those are the kids that are in the EL program and are making a year's worth of gain in that year. So you have all students, then you have it broken down by the subgroups. As well. Notice the migrant population at the very end, that is at 31.9, and that's a really important indicator. Just because you're a migrant doesn't mean you're EL, and a lot of people can confuse that. I could live in Florida, but my family moves to North Carolina, to Georgia, to New York, following the crops that they pick, and then they end up back in Florida. So just because they're migrant doesn't mean that they are EL learning English. They may have a mastery of English. So we have to be clear on that designation. So that's EL progress. Right, then we have the ACT. And again, the ACT is the percentage of students that are ready out of the gate from Bladen County to enter into college. In other words, they would not have to go to community college to do some remediation before they go into a four-year university. Those are the ones that are ready, basically. And then you see that broken down by the subgroups. Then we have Workkeys. Those are our CTE concentrators. And then in this year, 1819, Governor Cooper allowed the accountability model to combine ACT and Workkeys together. So instead of looking at those objects individually, you combine them together. How many of our seniors that were in membership that year had either a proficient score for Workkeys or proficient score for ACT? Are they ready for college? Are they ready for a career? So that's the AWA, the ACT and Workkeys combination. And that tells you how many students are ready to go out of the door, not only with a high school diploma, but also with another credential for the workforce and for a college and career. And then finally, we have math course rigor and then the cohort graduation rate. And then we've got individual tabs for the individual schools. So let me talk about this for 1 second. You can look at all the schools, but this is Bladenboro Middle, and I just choose them because they're the first school number 315. The rest of them increase from that on, but you'll see under the ready, the Common Core ready model, their school performance grade was a C. Their achievement on their EOGs and EOCs equal to 54%. And then their growth was 74.9. Anything over a 70 means that they met expected growth as a school. And then when you average the achievement and the growth together, this counts 80%, growth is 20%, you come up with a grade of 58. Any school with a grade of 55 or higher would be a passing grade, if you will. But with a school with a grade of 54 or less, that's where you run into problems because you have a school performance grade of a D or an F. Now with the new model that we're under now, we're not only looking at whole school grades, we're now looking at individual subgroup grades. And that's why I broke it down the way it is here. Because in the new ESSA model, it's not about what the whole school is doing, it's about what are you doing for the subgroups. And if a school has a failing subgroup, a D or an F, that would make that school a targeted assistance school. So it's not about what the whole building is doing now. If you've got 30 kids in that building, they're going to make up a subgroup and you're going to get a grade. So in this case, even though Bladenboro Middle was okay with their overall grade, notice where do you have a D or an F when you're looking at that? So, yeah, the subgroups, the SWD, they would have an F grade. The ELs, they would have an F grade. And that's what made that school a targeted assistance school.
So you're saying just one subgroup could fail
Yes, sir.
and it would bring the school down?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So how do we fix all this?
What we need, Mr. Rader, we need data that we can turn on a dime with. We call that an educational formative assessment model. If we have that, and then we align our curriculum together, so the two run parallel, they're not zigzagging all over the place, but they truly are aligned. Teachers would get data relatively quickly, and if they see that their kids didn't get the concept, they didn't teach on the right level, or if there was something about that question or that skill that the kids didn't quite get, you've got plenty of time to go back and fix it. And that's the benefit of a formative assessment model. But it would take number one, adopting, okay, this is going to be what we're going to use. This is the data that we're going to monitor, the standards, if you will. And then we adjust our pacing to align with that. And until we get that, and it's not going to happen overnight.
So if I were a teacher
Mhm.
and I found out where who checked on me.
Who checks behind you? A lot of people do. Of course, the teacher, number one, you don't want formative assessment to be punitive. It should never be, I got you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I understand that.
But literally, when you see the data and you see you've got kids that are not meeting the targets, not meeting the standards, the EOG and the EOC should be the last place you look. If you should know well beforehand if Anthony is not going to make a proficient score, because the data that you've looked at all through the year has either told you yes he will or no he will not on a proficient score. Because I followed my pacing, I know what my standards are. I've looked at the formative assessment to tell me, does he have a solid understanding of the content standards? And then I make my changes throughout. If we don't put a thumb on the teacher, but we make it a learning experience for everybody, we can turn it around.
Now, what kind of assessments are you talking about? Like every month or?
Well, it can be. What I like, and this is the new model that the new EOGs and EOCs are heading towards really quickly. It's called the innovative assessment model, where like we have NC check-ins now, where you give in elementary and middle school 3 assessments during the year, and you find out how the kids are doing, and you can turn a dime and make that change. That'll be the way the new EOGs and EOCs will be. But at the same time, I would want that teacher to have a instrument to allow them to look at their instruction almost daily. I love them having data 3 times a year, but I would love it to be even more often.
So Mr. Henson, what about kindergarten, first, second grade?
They already have indicators that they could use. They do the KEA assessment, the kindergarten. Yeah. It's for kindergarten students to see if they've met certain benchmarks.
Yeah.
And then with K through 3, actually, they have another tool. 3rd grade can use the check-ins, but they also have a reading 3D formative assessment tool for reading. We don't have one for math necessarily for K2. That's something we would need to work on to develop. But ideally, the goal would be every content area teacher would get feedback to be able to adjust, monitor, change, and then monitor again all throughout the year to make sure that we're teaching on high level standards. And the benefits of the check-ins are they're free. They don't cost anything, and they're aligned to the content standards.
Can you share with them about the iReady that we've adopted for the math K8?
Yes, sir.
The reading as well.
So we do iReady for elementary and middle has become our core ELA of math. Now for K2, we use Reading Wonders. But for the other elementary and middle school grade levels, our core program is iReady, and that offers diagnostics as well, where teachers can monitor what the kids are doing. But we need to align our pacing to the content standards.
And that's something that we've worked with Ms. Whitesmith on, work with our academic coaches to really hone in on what that pacing looks like so we can have that common framework across. That makes the support model a whole lot easier. If we're teaching the same thing, progressing in the same way, we can make those adjustments across the district. You're looking at your school data and your district data at the same time. One thing that we shared in our leadership meeting last week is a lot of these formative assessment groups stop at 8th grade. I don't know why they do, but we've got to try to be strategic in helping our high schools have diagnostics. And what does that look like? And we actually have a tool that's now available to us through SchoolNet. We could potentially build some of our own assessments based on those standards. So that's something we're looking at as well, because we've got to provide some support there at the high school, because they don't always have this program like we could have at the K-8 level. So that's definitely one that we've talked about quite a bit, really want to get that kicked off. And that was a need that came up, that high school teachers also need some kind of formative instrument, whether that be something we create on our own and host it through SchoolNet, which the state provides to us as a tool, or is there something that we could use? But, you know, having that data on a more regular basis does let you adjust your instruction. So if I've taught let's say 3 weeks, and I've addressed 3 standards, I could give that formative assessment, review that. And one thing that the goal is not only for a teacher in the classroom to see what that data looks like. What are our trends? Are all of our students in this grade level having a challenge, we'll say multiplication, for example, or is a challenge division of fractions? So we know what that point is. That guy's at reteaching and what additional supports. Sometimes you may find teacher A has a strength in one part of the standard when teacher B has a strength in another part of the standard. Could they team teacher swap groups? So you got to think more creatively using that data to really modify your instruction, because the goal is for it to inform. So we do know that we've got a growth area for us there. And then really we need to maximize the tools that we already have in K-8. But then what can we really use for 9-12? But the data does us no good if we don't do anything with it. So that's where it takes that, and then that alignment with the curriculum and putting that together so that we are progressing. And then we identify our strengths and our challenges. And that's what makes us more strategic in how we modify instruction. So that's something that's a growth area for us that we've got to move in if we want our children to grow and be successful, because the true measure of a child's performance really is the academic growth that they have. Sometimes, the state has had an 80-20 model in the past where 80% was proficiency, 20% was growth. But really there's more value needs to be on growing children more so than really a proficiency figure. Proficiency is important, obviously, but showing a growth, all children don't grow at the same level or at the same pace. So our goal is you want children to have a year's worth of academic growth each year. That should be a target for us to do. And having this data helps us try to stay on track. We don't wait till that one-time measure, but that we truly use the data tools that we have or that we need to create to help us get there.
Well, if I remember correctly, growth was not a problem, was it?
For some schools it is.
Yes.
But growth used to be a small percentage of the data.
It's 20%.
And being proficient was the largest. I mean, every time I would look at it, it looked like our growth was pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have issues here and there, but overall,
Yes, sir.
the growth was pretty good.
So one thing they're trying to move to, and it hasn't passed yet, but I think the state board was going to try to take it up, is advocating for it being a truly half and half, 50% on the proficiency side, 50% on the growth side. And then that benefits the child too, as well as, all of us in that model. But again, it goes back to what that data says and what we do with that data. So we've got to be more purposeful and intentional with the data that we get.
Well, we can say we have growth at 0.005%, but how much growth was that?
No, it was a lot more than that.
I'm not saying
Right.
that. I'm just saying sometimes we say we have growth. It's really growth.
Right. A lot of it too, and really growth does become an individual. We have a collective measure that we get from the district, but it really goes back to that individual child and where are they at when you assess at point A. The end of the assessment's there, but how do we get there, being able to measure those points? Now, a reach to achieve model kind of does a good job of highlighting growth 3 or 4 times a year. I think it's 3 times. But, we kind of need to mimic that process for all the other grade levels so we truly see how they're moving. And there again, it depends on the child's unique learning capacity and abilities, where they are, and truly that target is to give them from point A to where they are, to try to get them a year's worth of academic growth based on their level. And, it's taught us and even coming into code, because hopefully we'll have the data approved by the state board in time for our next meeting. If not, it'll be October, where we can see, although it doesn't count for the accountability model, we have data to see what has happened now as a result of COVID. So then we'll see where those losses have been And then that creates more of a need to really be strategic with the use of the data.
But even at that, can we truly use that data? Because everybody was not getting the same type of help, I guess you could say, that the others, some of the others were
I'm
getting.
happy, Ms. Carroll, that we did it, but I'm so glad that it's not punitive, you know. We get to press the reset button, if you will, and start over. And that's where we're going to have to start over in 13 buildings.
And one thing too is that, you know, like Dr. Hanson said, you know, you had that moment in time capture. But where it really hits the road is when we get them back, we need to do some type of pre-assessment to truly see where they are, get that measure. They're coming to us regardless of their circumstance, whether they were virtual, whether they were did both. That's our true measure then is to, you know, look at those grade level standards. Where are they at entering into us? And then that becomes a measure then, and it's not going to be the same because we're going to have children all over the place. That's where we try to use our interventions, as many supports that we can to really target that. We're going to have some students that are going to need a high level of intervention support. Some will kind of be in the middle of the road. Some are going to have low, and some that may be fine. But we're going to have a classroom full of different learning abilities. So it's all on how we differentiate that instruction and how we utilize these tools to really be strategic and how we address. So it's causing us to think differently about how we do things, and we've got to be more purposeful. And it does go back, and you know, we see the subgroups, but each one of those numbers, although it was a summary of a test result, and you could say some kids may have been there twice or three times. I equate that to there's a child represented somewhere in those numbers. So when we think about a subgroup and we see 30, whether it be 30 scores, 30 students, to me, we have 30 children that fall in there that have specific needs in that subgroup that we've got to address. And that's true for everyone across the board. And even for students who may perform well, they should be showing growth as well, because we're not doing, you know, our due diligence at that point. Every child, wherever they are, should be able to demonstrate growth. And that's what we've got to work for and utilize that data. So it really has moved us in a different direction to think differently about not only our teaching, but how we use data and how that impacts instruction. And then not just getting the data, but our response to the data.
So again, let me give you one more example.
Mr. Hess.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at this data right now, and it's no different from the data we've been looking at from 2 or 3 years ago. Yes, we may be meeting some growth, but at the same time, our Black students are always underperforming. What are we going to do as a county, as teachers, administrators, counselors, to get those students on the level or better than the other groups in our school system?
It's definitely a concern, definitely statewide. It's a concern, and that's where we have to have a strong MTSS process in place to capture those students, not necessarily the race or ethnicity of the student, but any student that's failing. It's our due diligence to make sure that we capture those students and we support them in whatever their needs are. Sometimes it's not academic, sometimes it's social emotional, and we have to meet the child where they are to get them where they need to be.
So what are we going to do about the social and emotional learning part of that? Because that's very important, because we need to meet these students where they at.
I agree, totally. And the stronger we make our MTSS process, the better off we'll be able to meet the needs of all children.
Exactly. You think we have enough counseling?
There is, that's just something I was even just looking at. One thing I think, not even just counselors, but I think as a whole, student services, support personnel, counselors, social workers, nurses, that is an area that we could always use more help in. Because especially, we saw students come in for a moment in time for summer learning. We saw some challenges that were presented there, and that was a small group of students that came to us. When we get back August 23rd, we'll have 4,000 students in our building, in-person instruction. So we think about, that was around, Ms. White-Smith, correct, about 860 students, give or take. So you're looking at almost a fourth, and we knew we had some challenges there we had to work through. So we're going to further magnify that. We saw several things that manifested themselves on the social emotional side. And research will tell you that a lot of the academic concerns can be rectified if the social emotional is addressed. Because a lot of times those are barriers that are preventing a student from performing well. Those are barriers that could cause a student to react differently, perform better, maybe situations in a home environment. So we really got to be more purposeful. One thing that we're looking at that we need some data on the social emotional side. So we've reached out and got an agreement with Panorama to get data on the social emotional where students can have those individual inventories. It equips counselors and other student support staff to have inventories for those students that talk about some of those specific, maybe social emotional needs. Sometimes a child won't tell you some of those things that concern them, but they'll respond maybe in that private setting to, I've got a concern with this. That also opens up that conversation to have with parent or guardian about. And sometimes I think that we've seen that sometimes parents also know their children, but there may be even things sometimes that a child has not opened up to them about. So the goal is to not only get this data, but how do we respond to that? So to answer your question, I think there is a greater need, Mr. Roden. I think we struggle in our county too about mental health service providers because, even, when we have issues for referrals, often we don't have a place close by to even send them or to get those supports. We need that kind of support there. We had the Coastal Horizon, Ms. White-Smith, that correct before, but even that was very limited. So, how can we expand some of those services? And it goes back to those partnerships that we can have. The state has not done a lot in terms of adding additional support, but, we talked about really what social emotional learning, the concerns that we have now, but they really have not supported moving those allotments forward to get those additional positions. But I think we've got to continue to advocate because with what we saw in the summer and just some concerns that students had then, we know coming in that we've got, you can say magnify that 3 or 4 times potentially of some concerns. And a lot of it goes back to, it's been that separation with COVID. It's been, and I'll be honest with you, some issues for students existed before COVID even got there. But how we respond to that, I think we've got to be more strategic. But I agree, we've got to continue to advocate for additional student services personnel, counselors, social workers, nurses, mental health support, behavior specialists. That's something I think we need because there are students that have some very, very difficult challenges and needs there. And they're not going to perform at their greatest academically because you've got to address those things first.
I was just sitting here wondering, just to, 2/3 of our students are economically disadvantaged. I was just sitting here wondering how many of those get that.
Right. And so that's something too that we feel like, we get a snapshot from Power School of some at-risk factors, but I think this is going to take us even deeper into some of those, or what is a risk, or, does a child suffer from depression? Is it, issue at home? I think this gets deeper, which we can't support them and help them if we don't really know what that is. So we've got to have data coming back to us. Because I know sometimes you can't always rely on making a phone call because you're not going to always get a response. And Mr. Goins and Ms. Reverend Cox can tell you from their experience as counselors, they don't always get through. We've got to think of some different ways, but, we're only going to move forward. We've got to address the whole child. It's no more just about one thing or something else. We are truly now in a place where it's got to be the whole child. So we've got to understand the whole child and where those needs are and do everything in our power that we can do to do that. And when things that we can't do or we need help with, not be afraid to reach out and get those supports from the community and partnerships and churches and civic world. That's what we all work together because it is a community and we come together to do what we can for our students. So that's definitely, it's put us in a different place to think differently about how we do things. And, obviously we want the children to be the benefactors because that's why we're here. They're our number one priority. That's why we're all here to do what's best for children.
So we're not getting enough data on the MMSS program, MTSS program. We're not getting enough data to make that work effective.
We get some, I think it's limited. What we're looking at doing is going to help us in that work. Because we've had limited access. Most of the data that comes to us is really on the academic side. We don't get really a whole lot. And when you look at the risk factors that come in for Power School, that's monitoring attendance and grades. That's really what it gets at. I mean, you can highlight this for referrals, but again, I don't think it really does a lot in terms of calculating the percentages on that without going in the data and actually doing it. But again, you're looking at time limited things. And for us, this last year, discipline is somewhat skewed because we had some in, some out. So some children may be at risk. If that was a flag for them, they may have been virtual. That's not going to catch on that data now. So we know we've got to dig deeper and give students opportunity to be able to respond, whether it be an inventory, survey, whatever, to help us truly understand where they are. And the thing is those individual reports by child are going to be meaningful because it opens that conversation with parent and guardian, opens that conversation for, what are the challenges and what can we do to help, address those. So I think that this is going to be an important tool to help us in that work. Of course, you don't invest everything in a tool. It goes back to people and resource. So we've got to, again, I think we've got to continue to advocate for trying to get additional student services personnel.
And this sheet that I put in there for you just gives you a historical longitudinal data. This is again that performance composite where you mix all EOGs and EOCs together, and you can see yearly what the district did. But I love longitudinal data. I don't like flash in the pan data. I like to look at trends. And what I saw back in 2015, when I saw this group of children, this cohort of children, if you will, go from 3rd grade to 4th grade and drop that much in proficiency, that's when I really said, we got to change something here. So this was my test group actually for my dissertation. But it turned out so meaningful to me because this is Bladen County children that are following the formative assessment model. And when you look at this year to this year, we stopped the decline. And then we kept doing the formative assessment model with that same cohort of children. And they went from here to here. Literally, it supported the research absolutely on a significant level. We not only stopped the learning loss, if you will, but this particular cohort of students made more academic gains than any other grade level in the entire district. And to me, that's powerful when we align our teaching and our assessment correctly. And then finally, the last page I have for you is the new ESSA. So like I said, it's not about one grade, one school performance grade. It is about the subgroups that are being represented in your building. Okay, so how would I reduce that a little bit?
Go up in the middle, you see where that percentage is. Go to the middle. Go to the right a little more. No, over to the right.
Oh, right.
Yeah, see that drop down where the 150% is? There you go. You can reduce it.
Okay, so this is what was put in place by the state when they were charged with creating a new ESSA accountability model when the federal Congress passed ESSA. This was North Carolina's interpretation of that. So now it's not just the overall school performance grade. If you are a school that has one subgroup with an F grade, you're going to be tagged as targeted support CU, which means consistently underperforming. And the only way a school can get this marker off of them is to move that subgroup to a D or above. And that's going to be captured annually. It was supposed to happen after this year, but thankfully, the results are not going to be applied to accountability this year. But of course, with this year, we're now looking at that. And the subgroups, I got it here in red for you that are hotspots, if you will, are our Hispanic population, our Black population, students with disabilities, and ELs. Those are the subgroups that we've got to target to support them, because that's where I see the most academic difficulty in the district. And then we have another marker is TSI-AT. And that is where, of course, we look at longitudinal data. And the way that you get out of this is if you have an EVOS growth score of 1.0 or higher. And that is extremely hard to achieve in one school year. But they give you 3 years to do it. So you've got to move that subgroup at least 1.0 NCEs on EVOS according to growth. And the same subgroups were an issue there. Now, this was supposed to be redone last year, but thankfully, again, it will not be, but it very well may be this year. And we hope that nobody falls under CSI-AT. So I've talked a lot. Do you have any questions for me that I can answer?
I would say start your assessments. Evidently it works, so I would, I don't know if you have to come back with us with a plan for us to approve, but get something together.
It works. Literally in educational statistics, a 0.5 measure would indicate significance. When I did my study on Bladen County students, the significance level was 0.01. In other words, it was off the chart. If it was a drug, I could get FDA patent on it. So, it works. But that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir. Got a lot of work to do. At this time, I need a motion to accept our consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion to accept our consent agenda by Mr. Rozier, a second by Mr. McCoy. Any discussion? I yield to you, Ms. Valerie.
Thank you, sir. As I call your name, please indicate your vote. Chris Clark. Dennis Edwards. Tim Benton. Gary Yoda. Vincent Rozier. Corey Singletary. Alan West. Glenn McCoy. Roger Carroll. Mr. Chairman, you have 9 yeses.
Thank you very much.